Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host, and I am very excited to be with you today as I am welcoming back Bryce Blankenagel and Shannon Grover, my two favorite ex-Mormons to talk to about the Mormon theology and organization and structure and belief system. And they have shed so much light. I mean, 100 lumen, spotlights on this stuff. And have really helped me understand, as I like to say, rightfully or wrongfully, I know everybody's got their views on this, but as I like to say, the Mormon Church is an international business conglomerate that does cult on the side. I mean, it's just been amazing to learn the scope and breadth of this group. And I say that facetiously, of course, because they are a religious cult and they exert a great deal of control on their membership. And it really does kind of suck that they get the sort of universal pass that they seem to get from folks out there. So we're just going to keep exposing nonsense and abuses. So welcome back to my show, guys.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us. I'm excited for today.
Yeah. So today we're going to dive into some history. Let me give a real fast rundown here. I watched a show recently called American Primeval, and this show really inspired me to do this talk today because it is a very high production value, very well put together fictional work based on some Mormon history. There was a particular incident, which we're going to talk about today. And this incident has received various degrees of cover-up over the years and rewriting by the Mormon Church and its apologists. And it got me thinking, not only was American Primeval just great as a show, and I highly, highly recommend you all check it out. There were about 1,000 YouTube video responses to it when it first came out by all the Mormon apologists and people going on a tear about, that wasn't right. It was inaccurate about this and it was inaccurate about that. And my takeaway on it was that it was thematically correct, even if historically inaccurate and sort of conceptually true. Right. And so I do recommend you all check it out. Brigham Young is a major character in the course of the show, so you'll get to see him portrayed by a great actor. Yeah. And there's another historical true person who's also represented in the show, but the rest of it is fictional. And so what it got me thinking about, and what I talked to Bryce and Shannon about, was how much history in the Mormon Church has been covered up and rewritten and glossed over or given a nice sheen of, no, this wasn't the horrible thing that it really was. And
this
so
is not the event you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And so Bryce and Shannon were like, "Oh yeah, there's a few of those things. We got some things to talk about." So,
how many hours have we got?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I thought how we would begin this is because I figured there was going to be a lot, and I figured, in over what is it, 150 years now, 200 years of history.
Almost 200.
It's been a while, right, that the Mormons have been around. Mm-hmm. And in all that time, there have been a number of these incidents or episodes in history that the Mormon Church would really rather forget about. So I thought we would do sort of an overview show. And of course, Bryce has brought slides today. Without further ado, I do want to jump right into this and do this sort of overview of it. And then what I'm imagining is that probably in future episodes, we could dive into the real full Monty on each of these, or on select ones that we want to talk about in a lot more detail. I know, for example, the Mountain Meadows Massacre is going to be something we're going to dedicate a whole show to, no question about it.
Definitely.
So today, let's go ahead and just get the overview. So Bryce and Shannon, take it away.
Excellent. Let me just start with the screen share, and we can dive into the some of the aspects of, well, what is known as hidden Mormon history. And I'm glad that you bring up and invoke the Mountain Meadows Massacre because none of my slides today even begin to discuss it. And the reason is because it's such a massive and controversial subject that it needs to have its own episode dedicated to just it, like you said. And importantly, the cover up, the rediscovery of the bodies and what the church did to try and impose limitations on people examining the bodies that were exhumed, or the skeletons that were exhumed when they were building their memorial to the Mountain Meadows Massacre site that currently stands today. It is fascinating. It is an important subject in and of itself. But I thought that today it would be much better for us to just get a general tone of how Mormon history is discussed and how it is hidden, and bring up just a few controversial aspects that have taken place within hidden Mormon history and how the church has dealt with those, and what the church has done recently to become much more transparent on these things, and forced to become more transparent because of a legion of historians saying, hey, release the documents. Hey, you're not talking about this honestly. Hey, what about this contradicting artifact, and so on and so forth. So today I figure we would just focus on essentially 5 different topics. The first one is going to be about the first vision. Now, Shannon,
Yes.
you were a missionary.
Yes, I was.
Can you tell us what the missionaries will teach investigators when they are telling about the first vision and Joseph Smith's call to divination?
When Joseph Smith was 14 and was investigating various churches, because there were many different churches, diverse churches then, and every time he went, it just felt wrong. And as he was reading in his Bible, in James chapter 1, verse 5, this is pretty bad that this brainwashing is still strong, and I've been out for 10 years.
Yeah.
He read, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. And so he decided he would go and ask God himself. So there he went in 1820 out into the grove to pray to God. And the first thing that happened is he saw a pillar of light exactly over his head above the brightness of the sun, defying all description. It's coming above him in the air. And in that pillar of light, I'm not quite getting it all that right, sorry. But in that pillar of light were 2 personages whose brightness and glory defy all description, standing above him in the air. One of them turned to the other and said, Joseph, this is my beloved son, hear ye him. And then they talked to him and they told him that none of the churches were true and that he needed to not join any of them and that he would be the one to bring forth the new one. And of course, he got persecuted after that because, he got a vision and all that stuff. And that's how the church began. That is how missionaries teach it.
Wow.
And you haven't been a missionary for, let's say, a few decades.
1988 through 89.
It's important to note how deeply embedded into the consciousness of the Mormon population that story is, and how important it is to the church and to the membership. Yes. This is the founding myth of the church, that Joseph Smith went out into the grove and prayed. Then it became the sacred grove because God and Jesus appeared to him in a pillar of light.
People go visit the grove trying to figure out where it was he actually was kneeling to pray and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And I mean, there's more to the story, but missionaries don't give more to the story any more than they talk about temple stuff to people, so because, milk before meat kind of thing. You got to crawl before you can walk.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So the interesting, some of the hidden history of the First Vision account is that there are actually multiple different First Vision accounts, and that they contain details that contradict one another. And most importantly is that we see in the subsequent tellings of this story a mythical evolution or a legendary evolution in the story. where details not only become more specific, but they also inflate the details, the number of people that visit, the status of the individuals who visit, the names of the individuals who visit Joseph Smith become sharper and more grand as time passes. And importantly as well, this is supposedly occurred in 1820, but there is absolutely no record of this until 1832. And that 1832 source is from Joseph Smith's first dictated history. And this is more than 10 years after the events that he's describing. So it's just important that, this is the foundational myth of Mormonism. But for the first generation of Mormons, none of them knew this story. And we're going to harp on that point as we get deeper into this. It was later became propagandized by Brigham Young to elevate Joseph Smith's mythical character and his call to divine mission. So, yeah.
Let me just make sure I'm tracking with this and understanding what you're saying. So Mormons, so according to in Joseph Smith's lifetime, he starts the Mormon Church, and it goes for 10 plus years before any version of this story is being talked about or written down.
Even so, kind of. So
Okay.
the vision happens in 1820. The church is organized in 1830.
Yeah.
And it's 1832 that he first writes this story in his own journal history. And we're going to get into the details of that. But
Okay.
that was journal history. It was not published. It was never published. It was
Okay.
not actually officially published in a church periodical until 1842. So that's 22 years after the described events happened and 12 years after the church was founded.
So this guy gets visited by God and Jesus or angelic figures or, beings of light, and doesn't write that down or tell anybody about that for 10, 12 years?
Correct. Correct.
Correct.
And
Okay.
and
And this
it's
is the guy who wrote
also
everything down. He wrote down tons of stuff.
And
uh-huh.
talk to everybody. And he's 14. What 14-year-old keeps all that private?
Exactly. Wow. So yeah, he's 14 years old and he doesn't breathe a word of this or mention it in writing, at least that we know of, or tell
Yes.
anybody else about it, who would, of course, go write it down for 12. Wow. Okay,
And
good. I just want to make sure I
especially,
understood the context of that.
right.
Okay.
And make sure you also remember this. This is a time period where people had visions like this all the fucking time.
Right.
He's
Right.
not, he doesn't stand out as anything separate. All of these churches that were starting, these kind of things happened. It's
Right.
nothing new.
Right. Well, in a
Yeah.
way, then it sort of makes it more legitimate that he would come up with this story in order to sort of plug into what everybody else is doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
and it's also important to note, like for example, Rick Grunder put together this study. It's like 1,600 pages or something, but it's parallels to oh God, what is the title? Something parallels. Why can I not come up with this right now?
Can we look it up?
So, is it like
It's
parallels
just
in?
titled Mormon Parallels. That's what
Yeah.
it is.
Okay.
So I apologize for that. But it is really notable that he wrote this huge study, and it is essentially just seeking pre-1830 parallels to Joseph Smith's story and Book of Mormon stories.
Okay.
And he only ever published in this Mormon Parallels book sources that he had the physical copies for. He's also a rare book dealer. And I've seen some of his collection at his house in New York, and it's just a treasure trove of pre-1830 books, documents, exposés, and whatever. And it's important to note that he shows that there are other people who had visionary experiences that Joseph Smith likely pilfered the language or the experience from in order to write his own history.
There we go. There we
So
go.
that's notable. But so getting to the actual sources that are available to us for the first vision, 1832 is the first source. This supposedly happens in 1820. 12 years after the story happened is the first time that he actually writes anything about this, and it's in his own personal journal. And it's important to note also that this journal was in the First Presidency vault, so the Church Presidency vault. It was not in the Church History Archives, which means that it was available to researchers. This was in the vault, completely closed to research. when it was prior to it being transferred in 1973 to the church history archives.
Oh,
But
wow.
when it was transferred in the 70s, 3 leaves of this history had been cut out. And these are the 3 most important pages to the story. And they had been removed by the president, Joseph Fielding Smith, who was a great, who was a grand nephew of Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith's grandkid.
Right, right. We went over all that whole tree. So
Yep,
he
correct.
purposefully took 3 pages out of the book.
Yes, and this is known, this is acknowledged, and even the church's unofficial apologetic website, known as Fair Latter-day Saints, writes this about it. They say, quote, while apparently someone from the church historian's office was responsible for the excision of the leaves from the notebook, we don't know exactly who did it or why. We do, and we can, infer why, because it reveals details that are contradictory to the 1838 official version that Shannon just told us.
Ah, got it.
It says a
Okay.
possible motive was trying to maintain complete consistency with the 1838 account that was available in the Pearl of Great Price that Shannon just said. At that time, any differences between accounts could have been seen as possibly faith destroying. End quote.
Right. Well, there is a point to be made about hypocrisy and historical accounts, right? Because if
Right.
there is one thing that we tune into as human beings very quickly, it is contradictions and hypocrisy. It's one of those things that really sets off the moral radar very quickly. You
Yes.
know,
Mhm.
so this is important. Anyway, it's very interesting stuff.
Yeah. Kind of adding a little more context, it was in 1973 that this journal book was transferred to the church historian's office from the church First Presidency vault. But it was by the mid 1990s, we know that the 3 leaves that were cut out that were also saved, they were not discarded by Joseph Fielding Smith, were
Ah,
pasted back into this journal book. And now it is published online. You can see it for yourself by the Joseph Smith papers. But then the question kind of remains, if even the church apologetics website, the unofficial apologetics website, says that there are details within it that would be quote unquote possibly faith destroying. Let's find out what those details are, right?
yeah.
So the first of those details is that it dates the first vision to when Joseph Smith was 16 years old instead of 14 years old. So there's a
Okay.
2 year discrepancy. And when you're looking at historical documents, a 2 year discrepancy for events that are foundational like this, that's problematic because
Yeah.
a lot of different things were happening in 1820 versus 1822 when this was supposedly dated to. And it makes it, only 10 years instead of 12 years that have elapsed, which is also important when you're talking about memory retention and people's ability to remember events faithfully. 2 years can add considerable detriment to somebody's memory.
Sure.
But here's just a small excerpt from it. And I just want everyone to remember some of the high level details that Shannon told us from the 1838 narrative that we're going to discuss here in a minute of Joseph Smith meeting God and Jesus in the pillar of light, and so on and so forth. And just listen for those details in this account. Just try to find them. Joseph writes, the Lord heard my cry in the wilderness, and while in the attitude of calling upon the Lord in the 16th year of my age, a pillar of firelight above the brightness of the sun and noonday came down or come down from above and rested upon me, and I was filled with the Spirit of God. And the Lord opened the heavens upon me, and I saw the Lord, and he spake unto me, saying, Joseph, my son, thy sins are forgiven thee. Go thy walk in my statutes and keep my commandments. Behold, I am the Lord of glory. I was crucified for the world, that all those who believe on my name may have eternal life. Behold, the world lieth in sin, and at this time, and none doeth good, no, not one. They have turned aside from the gospel and keep not my commandments. They draw near to me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and mine anger is kindled against the inhabitants of the earth. So on and so forth. Behold, and lo, I come quickly, as it is written of me in the clouds, in the glory of my Father, and my soul was filled with love, and for many days I could rejoice with great joy, and the Lord was with me, but could find none that would believe the heavenly vision. End quote.
Wow. So
And
God's a little upset.
Yeah.
yeah, and he believed in the Trinity at that point, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
there are a couple of important details that we're highlighting here is that in the earliest vision, the heavens opened to him, not the Lord and Jesus came down in a pillar of fire. There is no
Right.
personages standing in a pillar of fire in this earliest account. And this is a Trinitarian God. This is God, Jesus the God, who is saying, I am the Lord, I was crucified. But the
Yeah.
later evolution does not, the later evolution of Joseph Smith's theology is not Trinitarian by the time he publishes the 1838 version in 1842. And that's when he has to make a separate distinguishing God the Father and Jesus the Son
Right.
as two
Right.
separate personages. So,
Because to be
Right.
very clear, Mormons absolutely do not believe in a Trinitarian God.
correct.
And so,
Okay.
They
Okay.
reject Trinitarianism.
Okay.
absolutely.
So this shows the evolution of his theology. This shows the evolution of the myth that it was, oh, the heavens opened, and then later accounts say that there are, personages standing in the pillar of fire in front of
Right.
him. And
Kind of
yes,
important differences.
Very.
important
Yeah.
differences. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
So those were the leaves that were cut out by
Okay.
Joseph Fielding Smith because they challenged the Trinitarian nature, or they challenged the Mormon nature of God, the later evolution of Joseph's theology, because this is the earliest, more consistent, and this is also the theology with which the Book of Mormon is written, a Trinitarian God. They have edited the Book of Mormon, the words of God, supposedly translated from ancient gold plates. They have edited them to be anti-Trinitarian when the initial 1830 version was a Trinitarian view of God, that Jesus is God.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
that is very interesting.
the Book of Mormon has been edited more than 10,000 times.
Yep. This
My
most true
goodness.
book of any book ever
Yeah, the most
written.
correct or most corrected book
Yep,
ever.
we're
I
like,
don't think
you forgot
Hubbard's
the
works have been
suffix.
edited that many times. That's like, wow, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
so that's the 1832 account, and notably, those are the notable major differences. That it
Yeah.
is anti-Mormon theology, and
Good.
so in 1834, Oliver Cowdery, under the direction of Joseph Smith, published his first official version of the history in the church's periodical titled "The Messenger and Advocate." So Joseph recorded the his history in 1834, and it wasn't until 1835 that this was actually published. But this is probably the most important document in illustrating the mythical evolution of Joseph Smith's claimed story.
Right.
Because in this account, Joseph talks about a revival, a religious revival taking place in his 17th year, and that's the year of 1823, and it causing "quote unquote" a great awakening or excitement raised on the subject of religion, end quote. And so Joseph likewise was pondering the nature of deity and the correct religion, and this is what the account says, quote, "On the evening of the 21st of September, 1823, previous to retiring to rest, our brother's mind was unusually wrought upon the subject which had so long agitated his mind. All he desired was to be prepared in heart to commune with some kind of messenger who could communicate to him the desired information of his acceptance with God. While continuing in prayer for a manifestation in some way that his sins were forgiven, endeavoring to exercise faith in the scriptures, on a sudden a light like that of the day, only of a purer and far more glorious appearance and brightness, burst into the room. Indeed, to use his own description, the first sight was as though the house was filled with consuming and unquenchable fire. This sudden appearance of light was so bright, as must naturally be expected, occasioned a shock or sensation visible to the extremities of the body. It was, however, followed with a calmness and serenity of mind, an overwhelming rapture of joy that surpassed understanding, and in a moment a personage stood before him." Now, this is important to illustrate. I'm going to pause briefly to note, in the earliest account, we don't have him wrestling with negative emotions prior to the positive emotions, but in the 1838 account, he's wrestling with an unseen malevolent force before God and Jesus appear in the pillar of light. So like in the earliest account, there's no malevolent force. In this one, there's a hint of a malevolent force. And then by the 1838 account, the malevolent force was "quote unquote" binding his tongue so that he couldn't speak. So more
Wow.
evolutionary, more mythical evolutions of this story, right? So
And of
Okay.
continuing
course,
on.
that's not something you teach investigators. People, you
Ah,
have
yes,
joined the
correct.
church. Yeah.
Yes. And notably as well, remember, this is describing what took place in 1823. And it says, it continues, it is no easy task to describe the appearance of a messenger from the skies, but it may be well to relate the particulars as far as given. The stature of this personage was a little above the common size of men in this age. His garment was perfectly white and had the appearance of being without seam. Though fear was banished from his heart, yet his surprise was no less when he heard him declare himself to be a messenger sent by commandment of the Lord to deliver a special message and to witness to him that his sins were forgiven and that his prayers were heard. So notably as well in this 1835 version, it also comes from a separate diary entry from Joseph Smith when a man named Joshua came and visited him, asking about how the Book of Mormon came to be. And Joseph recorded in his journal what he told this man, and then that's some of that is what Oliver Cowdery used to publish this 1835 history.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
and in this account, Joseph recalls that when he was praying to the Lord, quote unquote, for the first time, that he made a fruitless attempt to pray, that my tongue seemed to be swollen in my mouth so that I could not utter. I heard a noise behind me like some person walking towards me. I strove again to pray, but could not. The noise of walking seemed to draw nearer. I sprung up on my feet and looked around, but saw no personage or thing that was calculated to produce the noise of walking. I kneeled again, and my mouth was open, and my tongue liberated, and I called on the Lord in mighty prayer. A pillar of fire appeared above my head. It presently rested down upon me and filled me with joy unspeakable. And then Joseph
Wow.
sees a personage in the pillar before another personage descends, told him that his sins are forgiven, and testified unto me that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And then he says, and I saw many angels in this vision. And he dates this to when he was 14 years old. So the 1832 account dates that visionary experience to 1822. Now this 1835 account is saying that he had the first ministration of an angel in 1823, and now this here is trying to date it back to 1820 when he was 14 years old, and says essentially that he was forgiven and that he saw many angels in this vision. So once again, there's a discrepancy of how many personages are appearing, how many beings is he seeing, what is the year that this is actually taking place, and the details of the individual who appears in 1823 is also not consistent with what took place in 1822, according to the 1832 version.
How interesting that there would be so many changes so quickly within the course of a few years. He's really rechanged. He's changing up the narrative two or three different times in significant ways.
Mhm.
Who's showing up, what they're saying, this whole struggle before with some malevolent force. I mean, this is like two different stories almost. I can see why this would be considered um, faith challenging or faith shattering if people really put a lot of stock into this stuff. Is there any, we don't get too much into the weeds because I know we got a lot to cover today, but I'm just curious, what do you think the motivation was to make all these changes? Why not just stick with the original script?
That's a fantastic question. Each time that these are published are taking place when Joseph is dealing with a power struggle in the church. So the
Oh,
1832 account, when he's writing his history, he's dealing with Sidney Rigdon trying to claim too much power.
okay.
1834, the church was undergoing what was termed the Mormon expulsion from Jackson County. Joseph had declared that Jackson County, Missouri, was the touchdown point where the second coming would begin, that Zion, the New Jerusalem, the Mormon theocracy would be built in Jackson County, Missouri, and the Jackson citizens were like, hey, we don't like these immigrants, get the hell out of our county, and they violently expelled the Mormons from it, which a lot of Mormons saw as a violation of Joseph Smith's prophecies. And when a prophet delivers a prophecy that turns out to be false, what do you call that person? A
Right.
false fucking prophet.
Exactly.
So then
Right.
1834 and 1835, in order to reclaim power, he predates to an earlier date and increases the divine nature of the story
Yeah.
Right.
that eventually takes place, and that causes people to say, "Oh, well, he actually was visited by God and Jesus, therefore he must have some there must be some kind of divine call to this, and he may err in some ways of being a man, but at the same time, he's still divinely ordained to be the mouthpiece of God." And this is no less the case in 1838 when he publishes, actually doesn't publish, but he writes his official history that becomes canonized. That wasn't actually published until 1842 because during 1838 the church was undergoing what was known as the Missouri Mormon War, and Joseph Smith had succeeded in a coup of the Missouri leadership and had overtaken the Missouri church, which was larger than his Kirtland church. He had fled Kirtland in the middle of the night to escape legal judgments against him. He had one of his cronies burn down the church's printing office that had all of the documents in it related to the church bank and all of the fraud that was going on there. So he had a very unceremonious removal from the Kirtland church. And while he was en route to Missouri, the Kirtland church has essentially excommunicated Joseph Smith. They claimed that he was a false prophet. He had a revelation en route to the Missouri church that disciplinary proceedings that took place in one stake, the Kirtland, did not hold true for the other stake, that was the Missouri church. And therefore, when he got to Missouri, he proceeded to mount a coup against the Missouri leadership and succeeded in doing so, and then immediately started writing his own history to once again divinize himself and to lay a higher claim to his authority, as well as to make it more consistent with his evolving theology to separate God from Jesus, that there was no longer this Trinitarian concept.
Got it. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And
So,
by the
yeah.
way, to take note, since we're talking hidden history, none of that about Joseph Smith being excommunicated himself is ever taught to Mormons.
I would imagine that would have to be
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
his own church
he is
kicking him out.
just deity almost. Yeah, I mean, there's songs to him, praise to the man, which I get so irritated at it that I changed the words to praise to the Hobbit. But it's a really good version. But at any rate, that's something you don't dare teach is that Joseph Smith did something wrong. And so, yeah.
Right. Right. How
Yeah.
interesting. So he's literally rewriting his history every couple years to keep himself on top of the situation as it's evolving, and he's sort of burning bridges behind him, or things are happening that are events are catching up with him, i.e. consequences. And so, no, that's not what happened. It was this other thing that happened. And
Yep.
so, okay, got it. Got it.
Typical con man.
Exactly.
Well, yeah,
It's
very much
deflect, distract, do whatever you can to get people's attention off of your past mistakes and just fail forward. Joseph Smith was a poster child of failing forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they call it DARVO these days, right? Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender, right? So
Yeah,
it wasn't,
there you go.
it wasn't me, it was them. It was them.
Yeah.
See, it was them. So,
and consistent with that idea, when he writes his 1838 version, that's the first time that we have the language that Joseph, quote unquote, must join none of the other sects, for they were all wrong, that their creeds were an abomination in his sight, and that those professors were all corrupt.
there we go.
But
There we
every
go.
religion is wrong except Joseph Smith's religion.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, South Park confirms that a couple hundred years later, so we know that must be true, right? Which
They do their
religion is it,
research.
Satan? Which one is the right one? The Mormons.
It was the
had
Mormons.
it right.
The Mormons got it right. Oh!
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So this is fascinating.
Yeah, notably as well in this 1838 account that Shannon just reiterated, that is canonized as part of Mormon scripture. And that's another big point of why they've hidden the history of the other accounts, because you have scripture telling Joseph Smith's story. And when you have other accounts from Joseph Smith's own hand, from his own mind, that contradict scripture, what do you do with that? How do you handle that? Which is true? Which is the accurate one? Why is the one that's closest to the event that's recorded in 1832 in a private journal? Why is that not the canonized version? Why is this later evolution that was published 22 years after the event took place the canonized one? Right. So it introduces a lot of questions and a lot of sticky things that the Mormon leadership itself doesn't want to deal with.
Yeah, makes total sense.
And notably as well in this one, he alludes to persecution for his heavenly vision and that other people didn't believe him. But he really digs in on this concept of persecution, that he says that he was, quote unquote, persecuted by all classes of men, both religious and irreligious, because I continued to affirm that I had seen a vision, end quote. And it's also notable as well, quote, in this count, he quote the angel. This is not 1820. This is the 1823 vision when the angel appears to him, as Mormons know it today. Actually, you know what, Shannon? Can you tell the 1820? The
Oh,
one you described at the beginning was Jesus and God appearing.
right.
There's
That's right.
also the 1823 visitation.
1823, when he's sleeping in the same bed as all of his brothers and sisters
Uh-huh.
and reading and trying to figure out a few things. And then an angel appears to him. And I'm like, why didn't he wake up all the other kids? Because you got this bright light, so bright, that that in the movie they make of it, it shows it shining clear out across the fields. Anyway, sorry, it's random moment. But this man comes to him and says he's Moroni. And Joseph spends a lot of time this homoerotic description of what Moroni was and wasn't wearing, um, which is a little bit weird.
I'll read
And
it.
then,
I'll read it. Don't worry.
and then he tells them about the gold plates and where they're buried, gives the history of all of that, and that it's Joseph's job to get them and to translate them. But he can only do, and he comes to him 3 times that night. And then the next morning, when Joseph is out working in the fields, he faints because he didn't get any sleep that night. And he appears to him again and says, "Tell your dad so that you can go and see them." And so he goes to get the plates out. But when he looks at them and thinks of how valuable they are, he's stopped from picking them up and told to come back every year at that point. It's like September or something.
21st. Yeah, it's on the
September what?
equinox.
Yeah. And when he is pure enough, he can take him. So it's like 4 years he goes and he gets more instructions from Moroni. And this is the Moroni in the Book of Mormon, by the way, because there's more than one, who was the one who buried the plates, not Captain Moroni, who committed genocide and really loved war and all that shit. No, this is the one who buried the plates, the last prophet.
Chris, I
This,
love your reaction to that. No, it's not the Hitler of the Book of Mormon Moroni. It's the
right.
Moroni that buried the plates. Yes.
Yeah, this one.
Wow. I
Just
didn't
saying.
realize there was more than one. As an outsider,
Oh
I've only been
God.
familiar with.
You have no idea. I mean, there's so many
There's like 9
Nephites.
Moronis.
There's
Wow.
yeah, there's
30
Nephites and
Nephi's.
Lehis all over the fucking place.
Oh my God.
Yes. There's even a Noah in there, only he's the bad guy. Anyway,
Yep.
sorry, the
Wow.
tangent there. Anyway, so 4 years later, when it's determined that he has no longer got any thoughts of selling it because they're poor, because none of them can use money correctly, um, he goes, he's married at this point, and he gets them, and immediately people are there to steal them from him, because Satan. So that's what we teach.
Mhm.
There's more,
Okay.
but that's the biggest part.
See, this is interesting just in terms of clarifying something because I, not being anywhere near as familiar as you guys are with this history, I was under the impression that this angel appeared and I didn't know it was, sort of in bed. I guess Willy Wonka style, everybody's in the same bed. That's
Yes.
interesting. And I didn't know that so much time passed between him getting the word, hey, look, go get those plates and translate them. I thought that was like a next day kind of thing. Like, I mean, if an angel appeared to me and said, hey, man, I buried some plates in your backyard, go get them and dig them up and translate them, I'd be on that, like, I'd be all over that.
Right.
But he takes quite some time to go around to get about getting the job
Which
done.
my hypothesis is he took that long because it took him that long to actually think through what he was going to have as the written story of the book.
Right, right. I mean, there's a lot there. The Book of Mormon is a big book. I mean, there's a lot there.
There's a
So,
lot, but there's also not a lot because you can tell it's not really a good writer, because every time they write themselves into a hole, they're like, well, shit. Okay, well, this 1,000 and this 10,000 and this 10,000 got together and had a war and everybody died. And then this happened.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how he
Right.
solves things, because, that's what religion does.
Well, genocide is kind of popular in those old
It's
texts. So,
very popular. He
yeah.
loved his Old Testament.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is, look, it's just a fact. I mean, there's a lot of people dying in these books. There's no question
Hmm.
about that. It's not my take on it. It just kind of is what it is.
It is what it is, and it is what it is. And the history of humans being human is wars. The majority of wars were over religion.
That's true. That is
Yeah.
very true. So, okay, fair enough. Just wanted to clarify a couple of those things because I didn't realize that was
Yeah.
how the story went. I got the sort of Reader's Digest abridged, South Park version, right, where it's
Yes.
just sort of bop 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 bop, through the major events of this and
Hmm.
misses some of these details.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing too, I don't know if I'm interrupting you, Bryce, sorry,
No, go ahead.
but though with them, excuse me, with them admitting now that there's multiple versions, the church gives out their own explanation for it, so you don't have to go and read all of them. Which, of course, that should be immediately suspect to anybody, because that means they are crafting the narrative. But there are multiple TBMs, true believing Mormons, who have said to me, "Oh, well, the fact that there's multiple versions of the first vision is a testimony builder to me, because as you grow up, you see things different ways, and et cetera, et cetera." And I was like, yeah, but you it's still at the core the same thing. He might have a few more details about things, but it should still be at the core the same. And so the way the church authorities have presented it makes everyone think at the core it's still Joseph Smith, age 14, having God and Jesus visit him in a pillar of light,
Right.
which
Right.
it is not.
Right.
Correct. And
You
that's
have
only
to.
the latest account.
you
Yeah.
you kind of have to engage more of the critical thinking than
Yes.
people are emotionally prepared to do at that point, right? As true believers, there's too much. I mean, if I just throw this into the REM thing for a second, there's just too much emotional investment in believing the core concept of the story, and so that's reflected in the way it's justified. Well, it's basically the same story, right?
Yeah.
That way I don't have to engage with it really. I don't have to
Hmm.
go into the details because I already know in my heart of hearts what the real truth is, right? And so,
Right.
that's just such a pitch perfect example of how we rationalize things to be so that we can maintain the emotional integrity of the experience, right? And
Yep.
even deeper, the moral experience of it. So it's just throwing that out there as a comment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally agree. Yeah, and like we have a phrase on Glassbox Podcast that comes from an early story of Nauvoo era Joseph Smith, that a man came to show Joseph what he knew was a Greek Psalter, a copy of one of the New Testament books in Greek, and asked if Joseph Smith could translate it, because Joseph had billed himself as a translator of dead languages. Any language that humans could not translate, he could by the gift and power of God, which is the rock in the hat, the Urim and Thummim, and everything, right?
Oh,
And the man said, "What do you think of this manuscript?" And Joseph said, "It's Coptic, Egyptian, and two other dead languages, but not a word of Greek is on this manuscript." And he pointed to the big letter at the beginning of each line and said, "Them is the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and them is the translation afterwards." So he clearly didn't know dead languages, and we're going to discuss this with another one of these hidden history things here pretty soon. But he didn't understand them, and this guy clearly was well aware that Joseph was a fraud and was just trying to get him, and got him. But earlier in that day, before this guy met with Joseph Smith, he was just cavorting around with a bunch of Mormons in the kingdom on the Mississippi. Nauvoo, it was Joseph Smith's little fiefdom, and he they looked to a passage within the Bible that said, something is beyond the boundaries of something else, and that Mormons were using that as justification for the native inhabitants of America being Israelites. And he said, but this place, that America is clearly not beyond this place. It's directly west of this place. Why would the Bible be wrong? And showed the man a map, a world geography map to show him like, no, the Bible doesn't say what you think it says. And the man looked at it and said, well, the map is wrong. And that's the phrase that we have on the Glassbox podcast. When you are shown direct information that contradicts your beliefs, well, the map is wrong.
That's
Like,
right.
it's better for me to say that world geography is all a farce, that the world is not laid out the way that it is actually laid out, than for my beliefs to be wrong. And that's how much a person's rationality will explain away problems, will go into a protective mode to keep their ethics and their emotions and their morals fully intact.
That's right. That's exactly right. I have to bring this up just because it's such a parallel with Scientology, is that L. Ron Hubbard specifically talked about in lectures how the speed of light is not the galactic speed limit, and that there are ships he remembers very well that could, cruise 10 times the speed of light to go from galaxy to galaxy and place to place.
Warp speed.
And
Yes.
that's right. And that
We're going plaid.
clearly, because of his account of history going back, millions, trillions, quadrillions of years, the earth scientists and physics just gets it wrong. They're just wrong,
Yep.
and he said his best argument, against carbon dating. Carbon dating is just wrong because they have misestimated. This was his thing. They have grossly misestimated how much carbon there actually is in the universe, right? And so their rate of degradation of carbon is totally off, and they just don't know it. And they're just a bunch of bumbling idiots, three stooges in physics and anthropology and archaeology and all those sciences. They're just a bunch of bumbling fools. We're the ones who have the truth. And it boggles me from the outside. I completely understand it because I was there and I bought it. I bought it. I bought it. Right. And yet, you get out of that and you just don't even recognize yourself. You're like, who was that person who actually bought into that bullshit? Right. So
Exactly.
it's an amazing change that can happen when you come out of the need to twist reality into a pretzel in order to maintain that emotional base and that belief system, so it's powerful stuff,
Yes.
when people are messing with the truth that way. Just as a comment on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the map is wrong. The map
Yeah.
Map is wrong.
It's our byline in the podcast
is.
because it applies whatever the map is, this metaphorical map, right? Geography, all wrong. Archaeology,
Yeah.
all wrong. Evolution and
DNA,
biology,
all wrong.
all wrong. DNA, all wrong. All of it is all wrong because my beliefs, my fifis are more important than what scientists tell us about the world.
That's right.
So
That
just to
nailed
wrap
it.
up on the First Vision accounts here, Shan, you teased it earlier with the homoerotic description. I hope everybody has their lotion ready. This is what Joseph Smith states. 1823 version, vision. He had on a loose robe of most exquisite whiteness. It was a whiteness beyond anything earthly I had ever seen, nor do I believe that any earthly thing could be made to appear so exceedingly white and brilliant. His hands were naked, and his arms also a little above the wrist. So also were his feet naked, as were his legs a little above the ankles. His head and neck were also bare. I could discover that he had no other clothing on but this robe, as it was open so that I could see into his bosom.
Oh my God. He's talking about an angel's bosom.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
A naked
You
angel
weren't kidding.
with
I
a
thought you were
sheer robe
exaggerating a
on.
little bit.
Oh, no. We're not exaggerating at all.
Whoa.
Oh my God. In fact, here's something interesting to know. In the temple ceremony, it's not so anymore because I think There was too much public criticism over it. But when you went through for the first time, after you got baptized, if you were baptized before, so you got baptized, but when you went through for the first time, you go through this process called the initiatory. And this is the washing and anointing. And so the first thing they do is bless you with water, and they bless every part of your body. And so they would touch every part, your head that it may always hold wisdom, your eyes that they may always see whatever, your nose that it could, your mouth, your chin, your jaw, everything all the way down your breast. Yes. Your loins, your legs, everything. And you wore something like that. And it was basically a white poncho.
Yeah, it's
It was
called a
open
shield.
down the sides. It's called a shield. And you were fully, completely naked beneath it. And that be around 1900 is when they gave you that. Before that, I think you were totally
You're
naked.
actually naked,
And
correct?
it was a man
Wow.
doing it for both men and women. Now women do bless them for women. And so you do that, and then you go to the oil part, and they do all the same things again, and then they lay their hands on your head, and then you're given the garment to wear forever. And now they don't. Now you go in, and you'll have a shield over you that's actually sewn down the sides, and you're wearing a garment underneath already, your own garments, instead of them dressing you in them. And they also don't touch every part of your body anymore. Too many people have been like, I was sexually assaulted there. And I mean, I've had men talk to me about it where they had their balls fondled with the water and the oil, in these men's fingers. Women whose breasts got their whole hand on it, stuff like that, rather than just touch. I never had it that far. I mean, the closest I came was where they touched me here. But still, it's like, I know women who just refuse to do initiatories at all because of that,
Mm.
because when you go and do them for dead people, unless you're bringing in names for yourself, you would go and do it 10 times over. So you're just rotating through and over and over and over doing it.
Wow.
So this is
It's
where the
so
origin of that shield comes from.
No, it's so interesting because it's so occulty. I mean, there's
Yep.
so many, it's so ritualistic and reminds me so much of, OTO stuff and sort of the old occult stuff. And frankly, I'm a little bit like, well, they've taken all the fun out of it. I mean,
Except it's old men.
Yeah, right. Like
which
it could
kind
be fun if
of
everyone knows what's going on and they're like,
well,
all
that's
right, let's get naked and party together. Then
Yeah,
that's
if
cool.
everybody's in there by choice for that, yeah.
Yeah.
Because
that's right.
where I got assaulted was at the Vale before, after finishing the endowment and standing at the Vale at the 5 points of fellowship, and these men pulling me all the way up against them, and I'm feeling their erection. And so,
Unwanted,
yeah,
unwanted.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
no,
like
that's not
that's
obviously
an
that's not fun at
Unwanted.
assault.
all.
Yeah,
Unwanted describes the entire temple experience.
yes,
Yeah,
As speaking
yeah.
as someone who never went, I only did baptisms for the dead as a youth. I never went through the actual initiatory
oh
and
God, I've done
the
them all.
all of the endowment and
Mm.
everything. I never did it, but
The only
yeah.
thing I haven't done is the second endowment.
Yeah. Well, I
Mm.
mean, stop podcasting. Maybe one day you'll get there.
I could
Yeah,
get
right.
there, but I need a spouse that can get there.
That's
Wow.
true. Yeah, that's the problem.
And my spouse isn't
So
in church anymore, so
real quick
Yeah.
detail to wrap up this 1838 account that was published in
Yeah.
1842. He also says, when I first looked upon him, I was afraid, but the fear soon left me. He called me by name and said unto him that he said unto them that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Nephi. So that's another detail in all of this story, that Joseph Smith never in his life called the angel Moroni. He always called the angel Nephi that appeared to him in
yes.
1823. It's after the fact that Brigham Young changed it to be Moroni, and Moroni became the canonized and the scriptural and the touted propagandized narrative. Now,
I didn't know that. So it
Ah,
was
yeah,
never
very few people
Moroni
do.
during Joseph
during
Smith's
Joseph's
life?
life,
Nope.
correct. So that's even his mom, Lucy Mack, wrote in her biographical sketches of Joseph Smith, the posthumous biography of Joseph Smith, 19 or circa 1845. That's when she dictated it. She even recounted the angel as Nephi. So it was even accepted in the family lore that the angel that appeared to Joseph was Nephi, which it's really important to note the discrepancy in Mormon theology. That is, I mean, that is I mean, I'm trying to think of something. Oh, that is tantamount to saying Smaug is the one who delivered the ring to the fires of Mordor.
Right?
It's
Right?
totally mistaking
Yes.
the
Yeah.
primary character and which character appeared to Joseph Smith from the Book of Mormon and why, right?
Right.
Because if Moroni is the one appearing to Joseph Smith, it's because he's the one who buried the plates and can tell Joseph Smith where to go find the plates, where he buried them.
Right.
But
And
if
Nephi
Nephi is
isn't even the
appearing,
first prophet in the Book of Mormon. He's
exactly,
the second. His father Lehi was the first.
yeah,
Well, okay. Now you got me all curious again, and I
yeah.
hate it when you guys do this. So,
We do
so
this every time.
I know because it's just so crazy. I mean, like what?
It's
Okay.
fractal insanity, yeah.
Yeah, because you think you understand things, and then you guys are always like throwing these pretzels at me, and they're like, oh, no, it's actually all twisted up. So why would Brigham Young take it upon himself to literally change the name and I guess the being itself that appears to Joseph Smith, telling him about the plates? How does he do that? What was the context of that change?
It
Do we
just
know?
makes, in my opinion, it just makes more sense as a
Yes.
cohesive narrative that the angel who appeared to Joseph Smith was the one who buried the plates and could tell
Especially
Joseph where the plates
because
are.
in
Oh,
Mormon
oh,
folklore, the one who
okay,
comes to give them the Aaronic priesthood was the last one to hold it, which was John the Baptist. And
okay.
so that's also, and so it's all part of the Mormon narrative. So that actually, it makes perfect sense to switch it to Moroni.
Yeah, and
Okay.
to add even more meat to what Shannon just said, almost every single time the prophet, the office of prophet is passed in the Book of Mormon, the next prophet takes it and becomes the new writer of the Book of Mormon narrative. It's almost always father to son. There's only a
Yeah.
few exceptions where it'll go to a brother occasionally, and there will be an outside prophet once. And I think there's like two outside prophets who come in from not from the Nephite lineage, but every single time in the Book of Mormon, it is almost every single time it's a patrilineal descent.
Yeah.
So somebody is the prophet, historian, writer of the Book of Mormon. They pass it to their son, who becomes that as well. So the last person who was the writer and prophet, who was Moroni, buried the plates. It's consistent with the Book of Mormon theology that it is that person who has the authority to pass the office of prophet down to Joseph
Right.
Smith.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
there's only one time in there that it wasn't, and that was Nephi to his brother Jacob.
I think so. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Um,
Okay.
Just
This,
side
I
note.
guess sometimes the details are going to confuse me a little bit, but
Oh, the
I'm
details
just,
confuse everybody, even
yeah.
Mormons.
Well,
I
and this is
tell
why
you,
this is why higher criticism is important, right?
Yes.
Because we
yeah,
can't just go with the explanation that the map is wrong. We need to
Right.
find out which map is actually right then.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
the community of Christ recognizes things like the Book of Mormon is just 19th century literature. It is
Hmm.
not history, that kind of thing. And I think they see Joseph Smith, correct me if I'm wrong, Bryce, but they see Joseph Smith as a fallible man.
Yes,
And
100%.
so recognizing that he spent a lot of time trying to put this religion together, it doesn't take away from, I think, personally, I think recognizing that doesn't take away from it the religion as itself. What it
Right.
does is it takes away from the deification of the founder.
Absolutely. In the
Bingo.
same way that when Scientologists or even ex-Scientologists learn about Hubbard's war record and the river of lies that is L. Ron Hubbard's life,
Right.
they immediately go to the same kind of uh, place, the same kind of rationalization as this, right?
Right.
Where, well, yeah, Hubbard was Hubbard, but his discoveries, man. Now, come on, now, right? Got the same way you can go, well, you have Isaac Newton, who, in a couple of years does physics and shit, and and light and spectrums and all this insane stuff that he comes up with, calculus. But then then you go, yeah, but he also had these other crazy ass beliefs, and they go, well, yeah, sure, but calculus, so
Yep.
that's it's calculus. So they can separate the author from the thing, but it seems to me that the deification of Joseph Smith in the Mormon Church is not a small thing. It seems
No,
to
it's not.
be rather large part of the whole experience of being a
Yeah.
Mormon, that Joseph Smith was really this like very godly, holy figure, and everything he touched and had anything to do with was saintly and beautiful and wonderful. And
Right. Right.
and that's just not
It's not true.
accurate.
Well, it's even to the extent of when you die and you go up before God and Jesus on Judgment Day, you have judges in Israel there, the first of which is Joseph Smith himself judging
Wow.
you and your
Right.
life. So when you watch the movie of your life, you've got Joseph Smith, every bishop you've ever had, every prophet of the church you've ever had, probably your father, probably, I don't know, every home teacher, who the fuck knows? But they're going to be all these high priests, not any women on your side if you're a woman, but all these men there to judge you for your thing, beginning with Joseph Smith, who was the biggest dick of them all.
Yeah, that's crazy. I would not want that guy judging me, knowing what
No,
I
I don't
know
want
about
any of
him.
them anywhere near me.
Yeah,
No.
only if we're on equal footing. Like I can judge you too, right?
Right,
Right?
there we go.
Exactly. Hey,
If
Joseph,
I
I got a
can,
few questions.
I don't
Yeah.
care
Just a
if
couple.
I have the priesthood
Yep.
or not.
Yep. Yep.
I
Yep.
get to
Yeah.
judge you. Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right. Well,
So
let's go ahead and move on, because this is just
yeah.
I know we'll be here all day.
Yeah,
We can do
but
this all day.
the reason why I brought that up, and I'm glad we spent a lot of time on that, was because it is such a foundational aspect to Mormon theology, and it shows mythical evolution in Joseph Smith's timeline of his own foundational story.
Absolutely.
And when we see that somebody is fabricating details of their divine calling, what does that say about their character? That I think
Exactly.
that's the prescient question that is most important here. Is like what do we learn from this? What do we take from this? And are there why I think comparative religious studies are so important, because we can see other founding figures where the mythical evolution takes place, especially after their death, that the people who come along later and propagandize their history are very loath to stick to the facts and are happy to manufacture aspects that are propagandized, that inflate the narrative and show mythical and legendary evolution. And that took
Absolutely.
place with Joseph Smith's story. So the next hidden history thing that I want to talk about is the Council of 50 Minutes. Very briefly, I just want to read an excerpt from a book titled Council of 50, A Documentary History, written by Jedediah Rogers. The foreword was written by Klaus Hansen, and this is what it says in the foreword. Quote, "When the church declined to allow Jedediah access to documents, he went elsewhere and found typescripts. Add to that the importuning of the insiders who have been curious to see what has been kept under lock and key for over a century and a half, and the miracle of disclosure seems to be about to come to pass." So that book was published in 2014, and essentially what it did was it collated together basically all of the information that we had available about the Council of 50. And I think we've referred to the Council of 50 a couple of times in doing this show before, but just to illustrate what it is, this is something that Joseph established in March of 1844. That was just 3 months before he was assassinated. And the Council of 50 essentially operated as the political body of the church. The initial functions of it were to electioneer for his presidential campaign in 1844, and also to scout new Mormon settlements in Oregon Territory and the Republic of Texas, as well as to operate as the millennial government upon the return of Christ. So, notably as well, the Council of 50 anointed Joseph Smith as PP and K, which were coded initials to signify prophet, priest, and king over all of Israel. Now, Israel is not what we see it as today, because that didn't exist until the 1960s, right? So Israel back then was a theoretical concept, the New Jerusalem. It's in our Articles of Faith that the Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built upon the American continent, that the earth will be renewed and receive its paradisiacal glory. So when Joseph Smith talks
Oh,
about...
they thought Israel was going to be here.
Oh yeah.
Correct.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
And
in
that's
that's
Missouri.
still in the Article
interesting.
of Faith today.
In
Yes.
Missouri, in Missouri,
Yes.
Missouri.
In Missouri. Yep. Jackson County,
Oh,
Missouri. That's where it all starts.
Yep.
in mis in misery, right? How? Oh
I
my
can't help
God,
but
I did
call it that.
not
Sorry.
realize that. So the Mormons don't really acknowledge Israel.
Oh, they
I mean,
do.
they
They
obviously
do.
do. It
Yeah,
exists, but
very
they
much
don't
so.
think about it the same way others do.
This is the New Jerusalem, but it's so tied to the Old Jerusalem. These will be the bookends of the
Yeah.
earth, of God's kingdom, right? Is New
Okay.
Jerusalem in America, Old Jerusalem in Israel. And the
And it's,
church, yeah,
yeah, it's also because, according to Joseph Smith, the original Garden of Eden was also there
in
in
Missouri.
Missouri.
Correct.
Right. Right. So, okay. So, sorry, since this is a new concept to me in terms of the Mormon belief system. So how, so how do they think about Israel, the place now in terms of how that integrates with what Joseph Smith is talking about?
It's very consistent with modern evangelical Christian, but with added layers.
Yes.
Okay.
They believe that once I believe it's what, two apostles are slain in Jerusalem for their beliefs, that is going to signal the beginning of the end times. And they have built the, I mean, it's called the BYU Center there, but it's they built the building with the same dimensions as Solomon's Temple
Hmm.
in the BYU Center, Jerusalem. And they very much believe that Old Jerusalem is going to be just as important as Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be in America.
Right.
So it's
Okay.
very integral. It's very important, and they've made a ton of inroads into getting Mormonism into Israel as much as they possibly can.
Yeah. I mean,
Got it.
there is the
Wow.
prophecy that there will be a temple built there. And so I think what they're hoping to do is be able to slide it in and then just decide to call the BYU Center a temple now and turn it into one.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's
Same with the
already there.
visitor center
Exactly.
in Jackson County, Missouri. They also
Exactly.
built the visitor center there, right next to the place that Joseph, like the field that is currently owned by one of the other factions of the church. There's an open field there. They're known as the Temple Lot Mormons. They own it. That's where Joseph Smith dedicated, like, this is where the temple will be built for Zion. They buried cornerstones, and the Temple Lot Mormons have unearthed, exhumed those cornerstones, and have them in a glass case. The church, the LDS corporate LDS church, built a visitor center on a plot just right next to that spot, and it's just you can go and tour there, and they got missionaries staffed there 100% of the time. You can go hear the whole story of the Mormon trials and tribulations in Missouri, and it was that building was built to the exact dimensions of the temple under Joseph Smith's direction.
Yep.
Okay, got it. I'm trying to integrate this into my understanding of Christian nationalism and Christian
Uh-huh.
Zionism,
Correct.
which are, driving forces in our foreign policy and in our
Yep.
government structure right now. Which is why I think it's important to understand this stuff, because this is where these guys think this is all going, and they're very
Correct.
hungry for end times. They
Oh,
are
yeah.
just starving for it.
So are
So,
the Mormons. So are the Mormons.
yeah,
And in
Yeah.
fact, I would recommend, if people want to really look and see what Mormons actually think about all this, that you read the book Millennial Messiah by Bruce R. McConkie. Yes, it's older. It's put out in the 80s. I forgot what year. But it is like the playbook for any of these Proud Boy Mormons kind of thing. He goes into so much detail of what will happen in the last days, all the death and destruction and everything else. And this is something Mormons look forward to, and they
yeah.
still do. I mean, recently I was at an event that had a whole lot of Mormons at it, and I'd forgotten what it was like to be dumped down in the middle of a bunch of TBMs because my family, they know I'm out, and so they're actually pretty respectful to me, and I'm respectful to them, and we have 27,000 other things to talk about anyway. But I'm in there and they're like, oh, yeah, there's this going on, but it's the last days. I just really hope Jesus comes soon. And it's like, that's the playbook, is
Yeah.
pushing for that, because then he'll come and he'll murder everybody who's not Mormon. This is what Mormons believe. Everybody who's not Mormon will be murdered by Joseph or by Jesus Christ when he
Oh
comes.
my goodness.
This
Oh
isn't
my goodness.
the rapture thing. This is murder straight out.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So is that their interpretation of Revelation, or this is
Yes, as
Yeah.
okay?
well as the revelation they get from Joseph Smith and all that shit.
Right,
So,
because
yeah.
there's another version of that in the Book of Mormon.
Oh yeah. And
Yes.
so
Okay.
I actually we covered that like a few years ago on the Glass Box when we did our deep dive into it. And I was the one I had to read it. By the end of the year I was just like feeling battered because I hadn't realized just how awful Mormonism was in this respect, how
Yeah.
very much it was a death day cult.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
so
kind of what I'm fascinated by. Well, just bookmark this note because clearly we're going to have to do a show on
is the
Mormon end
27th
times
bookmark
because
today.
Oh yeah.
I'm now very curious about
Yes.
how they're approaching that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, cool,
Yeah,
cool.
and it's important to note that like what we're talking about here, sure, like we're talking about Joseph Smith's church, and then we're talking about Hugh Nibley's church, and Bruce McConkie's era of church, which is 60s, 70s, 80s. The church is much less overt about its Zionism, about it building a
Yes.
New Jerusalem than it used to be, but that those tendencies are still replete throughout it,
Oh, they're
and
still
Yeah.
the
there. They're just
current.
quiet about it. And part of
Yes,
it is
exactly.
building that $200 billion portfolio of theirs.
Yeah, so they can just buy
Right,
New Jerusalem. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
it's
okay.
important to note here that the Council of 50 is when Joseph Smith actually set out to overthrow the government and create his own theocratic government, and that's what the Council of 50
Right.
was. He was running for president, and the Council of 50 was either his plan for the government or his contingency plan if his election failed. So if he was able to make it to president, then he probably would have taken steps to instate the Council of 50 as some kind of a paralegal military or government organization, another pillar of the government apart from the legislative, judicial, and executive. Um, or if he failed in his presidential campaign, take the Mormons out west and build a theocracy with the Council of 50 operating as the government, which is what Brigham Young ended up doing.
Right.
So importantly, he created this Council of 50 in March of 1844 and was assassinated in June of 1844 while he was running for president. So whatever his plans for it, they never actually matured. It was up to his followers and the leaders who called their own councils of 50 in order to interpret what the initial purpose of the Council of 50 was. But
Wow.
notably, during Joseph Smith's time in the forming the Council of 50 and heading it, he called two men to serve a mission to Russia, and the purpose was to form a military alliance with Russia. And one member of the Council of 50, named Uriah Brown, had plans for a quote unquote liquid fire to destroy an army and navy. End quote, and that was armament that he had plans for being launched from submersible boats. So there was a member of the Council of 50 who was trying to form an alliance with Russia because he had an invention of essentially submarines that had flamethrowers on them, which would have been the
Right.
bane of any navy. And of course, Britain at the time was the ruling force in national and international politics because they had such an overpowerful navy.
That's right.
So any technology that could subvert Britain's naval power is going to subvert Britain's impact and control over world politics. And that was the
Damn.
idea that the Council of 50 wanted to ally with Russia in order to get the funding for these plans, to devise them, and to begin a world war, essentially.
Yeah.
Damn. Joseph
Uh,
Smith did not think small.
No.
no, he did not. And a big part of
Wow.
this was he called on the Council of 50 to organize 100,000 soldiers, that they would make a military campaign across the entirety of the West, that was west of the Mississippi, because that was mostly unsettled territory. And that would be the geographical boundaries of his theocracy. And notably as well, he planned on confederating the Native Americans. This was something that had been in Joseph Smith's timeline in history, and his machinations from the authoring of the Book of Mormon was to take the oppressed and exiled and victims of cultural and ethnic genocide, the Native Americans, he wanted to give them a Christian history so that he could be their leader. And in doing so, gaining all of the converts, he would be able to confederate the Native Americans as well as the freed slaves, because he was an abolitionist by the time he was running for president. Confederate all the freed slaves, confederate all the Native Americans to fight and overthrow the American government.
Wow.
So
What
that
a
was his initial dream plan, and that's if you read the introduction to the Book of Mormon, it's very clear that that was the intention all along.
Yeah.
damn. I didn't know that. And that makes some things make sense. Like why the Native Americans were, the original tribe
Yes.
and all, or lost tribe and all that.
Yep.
Wow. I had
And the
no
first missions,
idea he had
the
such
first missions were
aspirations.
to Native Americans. The first,
Wow.
very, very first missions that he called were to Native Americans in Missouri.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yep.
I wonder,
And
one can only wonder in some alternate, future history or history timeline, what would have happened had he succeeded at something like that.
I know. It's a
yeah,
frightening thought, isn't it?
it
It's
really is.
wild.
And
Yeah.
to see who did succeed in Joseph's ideas and machinations was Brigham Young, and what he was able to accomplish because
Yeah.
Joseph Smith was a dreamer and a party boy and a shiny chaser, right? Any new
Yeah.
idea, any new thing, he wants to go chase something shiny and new and
He's a
exciting.
raccoon.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But when somebody like Brigham Young, a true cutthroat, a true businessman, comes along and has the fortitude and the know-how to bring ideas and plans into reality, what they are able to accomplish, well, I mean, I haven't watched it yet, but you saw American Primeval.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, the state of Utah exists for a reason, and
Yep.
Yeah,
there's a lot of blood behind that. So,
So much
because
blood.
when you're carving out frontier territory, it's brutal,
Yeah.
and
There
life
are
is brutal, and
rivers of blood.
the morality of that world is not the morality of a civilized world.
Mm-mm.
It's a very different thing.
yeah.
Mm-mm.
So,
Wow.
so to focus on the Council of 50 briefly
Yeah.
here, it was created as a government within a government. It was an act of sedition, right?
Yeah.
This was a treasonous piece of document that
Yeah.
was available, and the custodian, the creator of the document, was named William Clayton. And when Joseph Smith in June of 1844 gave himself up for arrest because he had burned a rival printing press that was calling into question his authority and exposing his polygamy and his political aspirations, he burned that printing press as a novel expositor, which incited a riot. There were a lot of people who were not happy about him, taking away free speech. So he submitted to arrest in June of 1844. He told William Clayton, the custodian of the Council of 50 Minutes, to quote unquote burn or bury the minutes. And William Clayton did. He buried the notebook. I'm glad he didn't burn it. But Joseph Smith knew that if this document were discovered, this would be considered treason and he would face capital punishment for it.
Yep.
So burn or bury it. So William Clayton did. He buried the minutes, and then a few weeks after Joseph was assassinated, William Clayton exhumed the notebook. It was mostly destroyed, but he recreated it from his journal, from Joseph Smith's journal, from contemporary scraps of paper that he had written as just notes, and as well as from the surviving pieces of that document that did survive being interred.
Damn. Can you
Um,
find this thing today, or is it buried in
yeah,
some?
yeah. This is published by the church, by the Joseph Smith Papers Project. It's available on the church's own josephsmithpapers.org website. You can look at it for yourself. But I read the introduction to that 2014 book when we started talking about this, that was written by Jedediah Rogers,
Yeah.
because the Council of 50 Minutes were still suppressed when he wrote the book in 2014. He was not
Wow.
allowed access to read the minutes. He was not allowed research. They were in the First Presidency vault. They were not open to research in 2014.
Right. This is the document that didn't come out until recently. So this is very fresh that we even know about all
Very
this.
recent, yes.
Wow.
And it's interesting too, that like the Council of 50 also became the government in Utah when it was the Nation of Deseret, before it was organized as a territory. So from 1847 to 1850, the Council of 50 was the government of the Nation of Deseret. Now,
Wow.
the Compromise of 1850 is what gained Utah all of the territory that became the Utah Territory that was also New Mexico and Arizona, but in Nevada. But eventually those were all carved off out of Utah, and Utah became its state. But the Council of 50 did serve in a government function, but it also kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit until it kind of lost its functionality because Brigham and the Mormons controlled the territorial government so completely. There just wasn't a whole lot of need for the Council of 50 beyond the territorial government. But as the church was fighting the federal government on polygamy and coming under harsher and harsher penalties for continuing to practice polygamy, John Taylor actually briefly revived the Council of 50 to essentially continue running basically a shadow government, a shadow military, not military, but a shadow government inside the church, while the the territory of Utah was coming closer and closer into compliance with what the federal government wanted, so that it could gain statehood. And then after Utah gained statehood, then the Council of 50 just kind of disappears from the documentary record. So the Council of 50 minute book, this was known about by historians since the Council of 50 was created. B.H. Roberts in the early 1900s published the Comprehensive History Church and the volumes, and he talked about the Council of 50 in there, cited some of the minutes. Then Fawn Brodie mentioned the Council of 50 in her book No Man Knows My History. That's circa 1945. And historians since Fawn Brodie's book, at least, have been calling for the release of the Council of 50 minutes from the First Presidency vault. And finally, in just barely the last decade, I think it was 2015 or 16, that the church actually published the Council of 50 Minutes. And notably as well, the Utah era Council of 50 Minutes, those remain in the church vault, and that is closed to outside researchers to this day.
Oh, so there's probably more
Yeah,
that we
There'll
don't know
be
yet.
far worse. This is Brigham Young, the man with an iron fist that he didn't even bother putting inside of a velvet glove.
Right.
Yeah. God.
Yeah, how interesting. Well, this is why this stuff stays hidden. Okay, well,
Yep.
great. What else you got for us? This is fascinating.
Well, this is a slower burn, a longer burn, and it deals with Book of Mormon studies, and this specifically focuses on archaeology and DNA in the Book of Mormon. So there were various articles published in church periodicals talking about sites that were discovered in indigenous Native American sites that were discovered, and saying, well, this is clearly, Lehi's people, this clearly whatever. From Joseph Smith's days, whenever sites were discovered, they would publish about it in the Times of Seasons or in the Messenger and Advocate or the Millennial Star or whatever. And, it would always be like kind of an allusion to like, oh, and as more time progresses, then we're going to continue to discover more and more evidence for the Book of Mormon. So into this world, by the mid 1900s, so the 1940s, we finally have an ideologue who says, I'm going to go to Native American areas, Mesoamerica specifically, and I'm going to look for evidence for the Book of Mormon. And this is the guy named Thomas Stewart Ferguson. And notably as well, none of the statements that were ever published by the church were ever authoritative. They were always like, oh, well, that was an article written by an editor, so we don't really know where the Book of Mormon is. So none of the statements were ever authoritative, which always gives the church plausible deniability when it comes to Book of Mormon geography, right? So finally, this guy, Thomas Stewart Ferguson, comes along in the 1940s and says, I am going to go digging. I want to find evidence for the Book of Mormon. And he petitioned church leadership for funding for it, and they continued to stonewall him for, it was almost a decade that they said, no, we're not going to fund this. Go find your funding somewhere else. Finally, in 1952, President David O. McKay gave him the go-ahead, and there's a funny little exchange that when he finally got a meeting with David O. McKay, he says, David O. McKay asks him, how much is this going to cost? And he said, no more than it would cost to build a church. And McKay responds, well, we build $50,000 churches and we build $250,000 churches. Which one are you looking for? And he's like, no, the $250,000 church, that one. So And McKay gave him the funding for it, and he takes this, and this serves to be the foundations for what became the New World Archaeological Foundation, NWAF. It was founded in 1952, and the way that he was able to get the blessing of academics was that he brought in a few non-Mormon archaeologists to be part of the NWAF, which was a blessing in disguise. And he wrote in 1952, quote, "The archaeological data now available is entirely inadequate for testing the Book of Mormon." He predicted, however, that, quote, "the next 10 years of excavations in Mexico and Guatemala should enable us to make the archaeological tests," end quote. So early 1950s, he's got funding from the church, $250,000 in funding. He's, formed this NWAF. He's gung-ho about this. Like, I know within 10 years, we're going to find evidence for the Book of Mormon. We're going to find the archaeological sites that are going to be the civilizations of the Zoramites, or we're going to find Zarahemla. We're going to find the city of Nephi. We're going to, whatever. Like, we're going to find actual Book of Mormon geography, right? So they start digging in the early 1950s, and they go all the way into the early 1960s. And they found a lot of artifacts, a lot of data, a lot of civilizations that had never been explored before, because this was not our current era of Native American archaeology, which is a thriving and beautiful community. This was still not very well studied in Western society, Western culture. So this is some foundational work, foundational archaeology that the world of academic archaeology owes to this crazy Mormon who was going out there trying to find evidence for his book. And notably as well, right, he's not an archaeologist. He was a bookkeeper before he went on all of this digging spree. So they found a bunch of artifacts, and one of them that they found was actually a stone tablet that had writing on it. And Thomas Ferguson was like, "This must be the visions of Lehi that are recounted in the first book of Nephi." And he, published in a church periodical, "Hey, I found this artifact. Look how awesome this is. This must be this." But his colleagues, the non-Mormon archaeologists on the project, were like, "You don't know what you're talking about, man. This tablet actually originates with the Olmec Empire, which predates Lehi by nearly 1,000 years." And importantly, right, the Book of Mormon is written in Reformed Egyptian. So what he would need to find to even give a slight inkling of evidence for the Book of Mormon is something written in Egyptian or Hebrew.
Right.
It needs to be written in one of those two languages. And he considered that his smoking gun data point. If he could find one piece of artifact, one stone tablet, one, inscription on a temple wall, something that has Egyptian or Hebrew, then that would be the evidence that he needed to conclude that the Book of Mormon is actually true.
How interesting, because that
yeah.
wouldn't necessarily prove that. What it would certainly be a stepping stone
Yeah,
in
Yes.
that direction,
Yes. And
because it would be very hard to explain Egyptian or Hebrew text in America
it
on
would
a
be
stone, right?
without the Book of Mormon, right? If you
Yeah.
have the Book of Mormon, though, it explains it very well. Oh,
I mean,
there's this group.
it gives a version as to why that might be that way. That's right.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So what's interesting in Ferguson's story here is that it reveals what happens when you start your scientific inquiry with your conclusion in mind.
That's right.
And how long you can be chasing that ever-fleeting dragon before it turns around and bites you. And second, what happens when somebody who starts as an ideologue learns more and then walks away from their ideology because they learned new information and they incorporated that new information into their belief system. Right. Because by 1966, Thomas Stewart Ferguson was a lot less optimistic than he had been 14 years prior when the dig started. He said, quote, "My number one goal of establishing that Christ appeared in Mexico following the crucifixion will never be achieved until significant ancient manuscript discoveries are made. I hope it happens during our lifetimes."
Right.
So in 52, he says, "Give me a decade and I'll find all the archaeology artifacts that you need." 14 years later, he's like, "I hope it'll be done by my lifetime, but I'm not so sure anymore."
Right.
This is a horrible parallel, but I'm just going to bring it up because it was on my mind and I read about it recently. It brings to mind the Aryan archaeology digs and search that the Nazi Party was doing in the 1930s. Digging up, I mean, legit, right? I mean, they talk about it a little bit in a fantastical way in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the movie, right? Hitler's got all these, archaeological digs, but he did.
He
And they
did.
were trying to prove that the Aryans were the original race that
Yeah.
founded civilization and art and science and all of that. And they were, and Hitler himself got pretty fed up with this whole operation after a few years because, of course, they weren't finding anything. Because there is nothing to find because the Aryans weren't the original race, right? And so
Brown
there,
people
that's
were.
it. Just brought that immediately to mind. Like I
Yeah.
said, it's not really the same, kind of thing, but in
But
a
it
way,
is.
conceptually,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
once again, the map is wrong.
The map is wrong.
That's what
right.
it comes back to is my
That's
beliefs
right.
are one thing, data tells me otherwise. Well, the data must be wrong.
That's
Yep.
right. That's right.
So it's important to note, right? So he writes that in 1966 that, 14 years of these digs have been going on. I hope that in my lifetime we'll find data that corroborates the Book of Mormon. Unfortunately for Ferguson and for the church in 1967, just a year after he publishes that article, the Book of Abraham papyri were discovered in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, which the church purchased from the museum and tried to hide it away. But there were so many newspaper articles that were talking about the discovery of these ancient papyri that they couldn't push them away, that they couldn't get them out of the cultural memory. And what's interesting, so the Book of Abraham, right, there's another book of Mormon scripture. In 1836, Joseph Smith buys some Egyptian papyri and mummies from a artifact seller. And once again, this goes back to archaeological digs, right? So Napoleon's troops in the late 1700s and early 1800s were doing all of these archaeological digs in Egypt, trying to find, the first civilizations, the first religion, just like Hitler was doing. And they were finding all these artifacts, and this began a fascination with ancient Egypt known as Egyptomania. And so Joseph Smith saying that the Book of Mormon is written in Reformed Egyptian was within the larger context of this meme of fascination with Egypt.
Oh,
So
okay.
Reformed Egyptian now, there's a cultural tie to all of this.
Okay.
This was also when the Rosetta Stone was discovered that allowed actual linguists to decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Right.
Right.
So this is all within the consciousness of the time. So these artifact dealers are buying up artifacts from ancient Egypt and then traveling all across the West to sell all these artifacts. And Joseph Smith is one of these suckers who buys some papyri and 3 mummies. And he claims that the papyri that he purchased were actually scrolls written by Father Abraham by his own hand. And so he buys these in 1836. He begins his translation efforts, which are laughable and a farce and something that we could devote an entire episode to. Finally, in 1842, he publishes The Book of Abraham, written by his own hand. That was a translation of these papyri. So these papyri were lost, but then they were rediscovered in 1967. And that's when, once they're rediscovered, Egyptologists can say, actually, this translation this is a funerary manuscript. This has nothing to do with Abraham. It has nothing to do with the Abrahamic God. This is just a common papyrus that is found with dead bodies all the time. It's part of their funeral rites.
Wow. So in other words, putting, not just egg, but an entire omelet on Joseph Smith's face.
Yes.
About this translation.
Exactly. Yep.
And one of the key apologists of the church around then was Hugh Nibley, who also was an Egyptologist and everything else. And so the church asked him to write a rebuttal about any of this stuff said by them. And it took him 5 years to say anything at all. And when he finally did, it was so fucking pithy. It was this, we just don't have all of it. That's all. This is, well, that's that part. But the part that's missing, that's the Book of Abraham.
Of course.
The missing scroll theory.
Don't look at what was said in there, though. But yeah, that's really the case. Yeah.
How interesting, because of course he knew his entire life work and credibility was on the line. And if he were to go, no, you guys got it all wrong. Well, then you're literally saying the Rosetta Stone is wrong. You're literally saying all of this.
The map is wrong.
The map is wrong, baby, right?
Yeah.
And he's just not willing to go there because he knows
he would lose
that's just going
everything.
to signal his professional demise,
Yes.
Correct. Yep. And he
Right.
died a member in good standing, the leading apologist of the church, and nobody's
Yep.
replaced him ever since.
No,
Wow.
nobody has.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are other apologists, and there's several still out there now, but nowhere near as high up. I mean, he wasn't a general authority at all because I don't think, I mean, at least for sure he wasn't even in the Quorum of the 12, and I doubt they would ever put an apologist in there because then everything they had said would be under a microscope.
Right.
And
Right.
you can't do that because, you have to have the apologist say things so that you can, deny them later if you have to.
Yep.
Right.
So,
Right.
Plausible
Right.
deniability every time.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
one thing about the ones today, but none of them have near the clout that he had, that Nibley had. He
Yep.
taught at BYU and very charismatic man, very interesting to have a class from. I mean, he was in my ward when we first got married. He died there a few years later, but
Oh, so you knew
um,
him.
sort of like that's Hugh Nibley, you know.
Right. Okay.
He's a
Okay.
celebrity, very much a
He's the
celebrity in
celebrity.
certain
He
Yeah.
doesn't
circles.
talk
Yep.
to me, but he was just
Okay.
he was interesting. I mean, we did a book of his a
Yeah.
couple years ago.
Right.
So.
Glass box. Yep.
Right. Right.
So I want to bring it together here. So the Book
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Abraham today, if people left the church because of historical issues, by and large, the Book of Abraham is going to figure heavily into that faith
That does.
crisis. Because
That
there
makes
is
sense.
no defense of this. Because if
Mm-mm.
the Book of Abraham is what it claims to be, the papyri that Joseph Smith purchased are written by Abraham, his own hand, but they're dated to like 200 BCE to 100 CE, which,
Right.
according to the biblical timeline, is 1600 years before Father Abraham ever lived. No other papyri have survived from that entire 1600-year period that are copies of this, that this could have been a copy of, right? So it just so happens that this one papyri from this one dead mummy, from this one time, from this one artifact dealer who happened to cross paths with Joseph Smith, happened to have the one copy of this papyri that's actually 1600 years older than almost all the other papyri that we actually have. And also that Abraham actually existed. And there's not a whole lot of evidence for Abraham actually being a real person,
Right.
let alone anything that is recounted in the Torah of what Abraham actually did. Right. So
Right.
there's so many different maps have to be wrong for the Book of Abraham to be right.
Yeah.
And it causes a lot of Mormons today who look at the Book of Abraham to be like, whoa, wait, hang on, what? What is going on? So in 1967, the papyri are discovered, and Thomas Stewart Ferguson similarly has the final pillar of his faith fall. That was the final thing that I think he needed to know that Joseph Smith was not what Joseph Smith claimed to be. Um,
Right.
and props to him because he lost his faith because of this. And he had spent 14 years digging in the ground in Mesoamerica looking for evidence for the Book of Mormon, only to always come up short, never finding the buried treasure. And now the Book of Abraham papyri are rediscovered, and it holds no connection to the Book of Abraham that's canonized. Once again, canonized as part of his scriptures. He's like,
Right.
this is it. This is it. He wrote in a letter to Apostle Hugh B. Brown, I must conclude that Joseph Smith had not the remotest skill in things Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so he ended up going to his stake president and presented with his stake president with all of the data that he had collected, with all of his research, and just said, I can't believe in the Book of Mormon anymore because of all of this. And instead of the stake president hearing his concerns, trying to help him through his faith crisis, the stake president got up and walked out of the room. And
Wow.
he was talking to a fellow Mormon colleague that was part of the NWAF, and he said, they can hardly excommunicate us when they won't look at the evidence. Because he had lost his faith. Privately, he had completely lost his faith, but publicly, he remained an authority figure on indigenous artifacts and Book of Mormon geography. So there were people who had read all of his articles that he had been publishing while he was doing all of the digs, and like, oh wow, what new things have you found? They come up and ask him, and he couldn't tell them. Well, I don't believe it anymore. I lost my faith because nothing in the ground works with anything that's in the book. So he would instead send them to Utah Lighthouse Ministries. And that's Gerald and Sandra Tanner. And if you know anything about Mormon academic circles, Gerald and Sandra Tanner, Utah Lighthouse Ministries, are people who grew up Mormons, started studying their church, lost faith, converted to Christianity, evangelical Christianity, and began an entire career of publishing controversial Mormon history. So a lot of documents, a lot of things that never were open to researchers, they would find in the Mormon underground, would be given to them from the Mormon document underground, and then they would publish it. And then the church would
Wow.
sue them, and they would say freedom of information. And then it was so Gerald and Sandra Tanner have been kind of the spearheads in fighting the church in the information public warfare since the late 60s when they founded. So Ferguson would actually, instead of answering people's questions when they would ask him about Book of Mormon geography, he's like, go read the Gerald and Sandra Tanner, which is, if anyone knows the context of the 70s, that is an excommunicable offense as well.
Yes, it is.
Right. Right. It's kind of like go read John A. Tex or
Yeah.
my books on Scientology, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. How interesting. How interesting. Because it's a great example of how it's not every day that this kind of thing happens, but sometimes when someone of intellectual rigor and respect, somebody who actually does have stock in and belief in academia, in knowledge, the pursuit of knowledge and facts and reason, when somebody's coming from that base, then they can be overwhelmed by facts.
Yeah.
And that can
Well,
override the lower stuff, you know?
let me just read a couple quotes from Ferguson that he wrote. So in 1975, he wrote an article and he said, with all of these great efforts, it cannot be established factually that anyone from Joseph Smith to the present day has put his finger on a single point of terrain that was a Book of Mormon geographical place. And the hemisphere has been pretty well checked out by competent people. Thousands of sites have been excavated. And a friend, questioned him on that article a year later, and he wrote in a letter. He said the real implication of that paper that I cited just a second ago is that you can't set Book of Mormon geography down anywhere because it is fictional and will never meet the requirements of the dirt archaeology. I should say what is in the ground will never conform to what is in the book. End quote.
There it
Yep.
is, right? It's
Yeah.
basically, you know,
He threw out the
translated,
gauntlet.
it's a myth.
Yeah.
It's a goddamn myth.
Yeah.
You know?
And so that it's just important to bring up Thomas Stewart Ferguson in when we're talking about Book of Mormon archaeology, because he was somebody who was an ideologue. He got the leadership, the president of the church, to not only sign off on his archaeology digs, but to fund those digs. He spent 14 years digging in the ground looking for the data that would confirm this. And as soon as they found any data, anything that was even slightly close to what was in the Book of Mormon, they would have blown that shit up. They would have put it everywhere. The Mormon propaganda machine would have churned into action, and the church wouldn't shut up about those things today if he made any discoveries that comport with the Book of Mormon. But he didn't. And the church funding his digs completely pulled away from it. They didn't say a single word about all of this. His stake president refused to excommunicate him, but also refused to engage in the criticisms that his archaeology research had revealed, because they're not going to excommunicate this guy. He was just now funded by the church to go do archaeology digs to prove the Book of Mormon. They're not going to excommunicate this guy. So he died.
Make a Galileo out of him. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he died as a person with a deep faith crisis. He called the Book of Mormon fictional. He said, what is in the ground will never conform to what is in the book. And in 1958, he had written a book, and posthumously, his son took that 58 book and published a second edition of it. And his son said, quote, the Ferguson family wanted the new book to be a tribute to Thomas Stewart Ferguson and his abiding testimony of the Book of Mormon and the divinity of the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, end quote.
Oh, fuck.
So his kid posthumously denounced his faith crisis and ignored all of the data from Ferguson's later writings, from his 1975 article, from everything that showed that he no longer believed in the Book of Mormon, and turned him into a a faith promoting story.
Wow, what a sad ending there.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, that was the son that he raised to believe all that. So, there
Yeah.
you go. It's sort of what comes around goes around.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
how
then, yeah.
interesting. I did not expect to find Ponce de Leon stories today in, sort of chasing the fountain of youth, right?
Uh,
How interesting.
yeah.
How interesting.
And another aspect to talk about in this is Thomas Murphy. And actually, we've interviewed briefly Thomas Murphy on our podcast when we went to a Sunstone a couple of years back. But Shannon, Thomas Murphy was actually important to
Was
your
important
faith
to me,
journey.
yeah,
Yeah.
because that was one of the first times I couldn't shove the doubt in the closet. But he decided to prove the Book of Mormon with DNA because he's a geneticist and everything. So he was studying mitochondrial DNA of the Native Americans in the New York region, as well as plant DNA and all that stuff, and essentially proved and published in a peer-reviewed publication that there was no match and showed actually where the Native Americans descended from,
Yeah.
which was mostly Asian.
And that's
And
on the slide. If you look, that's DNA in the Book of Mormon,
yes,
2002 publication. It was a watershed
Okay.
moment for a lot of people.
it was for a lot of people. And of course, the church wanted to excommunicate him for it. And he made sure, it kind of hit the news and they just sort of quietly forgot about it because, they hired their own geneticists to do the same kind of studies. And they made a big deal about that because they were just going to verify his studies, which had already been peer reviewed. But nothing happened,
Yeah.
which
Right.
means they found the same results as his.
That's right.
He is fascinating. He actually has a bunch of publications. He always publishes with somebody who's Native American. He got into this because his wife is Cherokee.
Ah,
I love his wife. She's adorable.
She's
But
fantastic.
like the most recent one that I know of that he did was in 2023, but called Kingman versus Freeman, Oneidas in the Book of Mormon. And what he'd been doing is showing how various battles that Captain Moroni ran are very directly battles between certain Native American tribes.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Source material
So
for the Book of
So,
Mormon.
just
he
disproving all of
stole
it.
from everything.
Yeah.
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 Just nope, not a lick of truth to any of this. It was Joseph Smith making shit up left, right, and center.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And so he
Wow.
really is fascinating. He works up in Seattle, I think it is.
Yep.
There's a lot of things he works on up there. He wasn't at Sunstone this year, which made me really sad.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There was
You know,
actually a session this year. I was like, I really wished I could hear Thomas Murphy's opinion of it. Yeah, it was called "Is Mormonism an Ethnicity?" And so the presenter presented her hypothesis of that.
oh boy.
And I would love to hear what a geneticist, an ethnographer, all these ones would have to say about it. I
Yes.
mean, it's something to study, I think, if they find it useful. But because, like,
Hmm.
you could legitimately say Jews are an ethnography or an ethnicity, but anyway. So that's
No,
tangent there.
it's fascinating to hear from real professionals on this stuff.
Exactly.
Um, again just a simple parallel, just to throw this out there, but it was revelatory to me to early on. I think within the first 2 years or so of me leaving Scientology, there was a conference put on in Canada where a sort of a biochemist, medical expert came on stage and broke down L. Ron Hubbard's sauna detox program and how it was total bullshit and how you don't sweat out toxins and drugs and things that are so-called lodged in the fatty tissues of your body. This is not how that works, and this is just not how biochemistry works. And she wasn't even on a roll. She wasn't an ex-Scientologist. She didn't have an axe to grind. She was just asked to speak on this. And so she looked into it and was like, yeah, this is absolute medical nonsense. There's nothing legit here at all. And it was revelatory to me because I had been somebody who had overseen the delivery of this purification program on people. I'd administered it and watched them do it day by day by day. And you can take direct observations, things you see right in front of you, and twist it all up to fit this narrative that Hubbard has of, well, bodies, fatty tissues, drugs, all this. And when you don't know what you don't know, then you don't realize the blanks and the holes that exist there. You just don't know because you're not thinking critically about it. You don't know biochemistry or how fatty tissues work, or the fact that, LSD is water soluble. So, hey, idiot, it's never going to be lodging in the fatty tissues. It goes through your system and you pee it out and it's gone, things like that. And you're just like, oh my God, I didn't know what I don't know. And that's, the advances in genetics and archaeology and whatnot are same, right? We bring this level of investigation to these claims that these religious figures make, and we find that it's just nothing but air. And they really don't know anything, and you come to learn that L. Ron Hubbard thought these thoughts because some Portuguese coroner supposed that maybe this was the case, that maybe drugs were lodging in the fatty tissues of the body. And Hubbard hears this in a conversation he has, I guess, in Portugal one fine day, and runs with it, And I think the thing that's so funny to me right now in commenting on this is the thousands and thousands of hours and the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that are wasted trying to chase these dragons, right? Trying to chase these fairy tales and prove them, only to find there's nothing there. They're just wispy nonsense. And I just think it's funny how we do that to ourselves, because of these deep emotional investments we make in these things. So anyway, just had to comment on that parallel there for a second, because when science meets, you understand from narratives like these why it is that science is such an enemy to religious faith and thought, right? And why these things can bump into each other, to the point that you mentioned earlier, that the Mormon Church tries to buy up these manuscripts and bury them rather than let the truth be known that Joseph Smith was just full of shit,
Yep.
and roll with the punches, because the fact of the matter is that regardless of the facts, there's still going to be thousands and thousands of Mormons who don't give a shit and don't care and don't want to hear it and are going to keep believing anyway. But the church leaders get all freaked out because they're going to lose people. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're telling people lies, you idiots. Just own the fact that it's faith-based nonsense. Joseph Smith didn't know what he was talking about. But hey, he wrote this book and we kind of like it, so let's go with it. And and they will just can't kind of go there. They can't go there when it's culty,
Well, let me also vocalize this. In the case of Thomas Murphy, I think we have one check mark of victory of science versus religion here.
Yeah.
Because he publishes DNA in the Book of Mormon Studies in 2002, and the church hints that they are calling together an excommunication disciplinary council for him. And he gets enough into the public mind, and nationwide articles are written about his study, about him. And the church, instead of excommunicating him, they just kind of walked away from the confrontation.
Yeah.
And importantly, they quietly edited the Book of Mormon yet again.
Yes,
because the introduction of it used to read that, let me find it real quick.
How interesting.
The introduction used to read, after thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the ancestors of the American Indians. And now that reads, after thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are among the ancestors of the American Indians.
Right.
So they literally edited their book of scripture to make it more consistent with Thomas Murphy's article. Yeah. And they quietly did this. There was no press release about it. There was no nothing. If you have a Book of Mormon printed prior to 2004 is when they made this edit, then it's not going to have among written in there. Nope. And mine, that's my scriptures, my set of scriptures. But any modern day Blue Book of Mormon that you get from the missionaries, they have that dodgy language added into it.
Of course they do. How fascinating. How fascinating.
So more hidden history.
Yeah, lots. This is fascinating stuff. Now, of course, we're reaching our time here, so we're going to go ahead and
I know, right?
wrap up today. But
If you permit me just 5 minutes to go through the last two that I want to talk about here,
oh,
just because
let's
it
do it. Let's
reveals
do it.
even more of this.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll just buzz through these really quickly here.
Cool, cool.
We talked about all the Book of Mormon and stuff, and then we have what are known as the William Clayton diaries. So William Clayton talked about him as being the author of the Council of 50 Minutes. He also kept diaries. He had a Liverpool journal from when he became an investigator to when he converted, but from 1842 to 44, he was Joseph Smith's personal scribe and close confidant. He knew all of the secrets. And he
Oh,
kept a Nauvoo journal that has been suppressed since it was brought over and interred in the church archives when he died in the 1880s, I think it was, and it remains suppressed to this day. And
really?
he talks openly about having a threesome with his wife and his mother-in-law and his wife's sisters. He talks about all of the problems, like the real world day-to-day problems that polygamy creates. And there's just a lot of sensitive information, juicy details in there that the church has not wanted to publish. So they said back in 2017 that they will release his Nauvoo journal, and we're still holding our breath for them to actually release that journal. And
Right.
this is an important journal when we're talking about, did Joseph Smith practice polygamy, or did he actually fight polygamy? And it was Brigham Young who started it all, because that's a conversation that makes a resurgence in Mormon academia every a couple of decades, and it's making a resurgence right now. Um, and there are just people who believe that Joseph Smith was only a monogamist and that it was Brigham Young and the people around him who started polygamy. And William Clayton's journal is one of these foundational key documents that holds data that the people who say that he was a monogamist want in order to bolster their side, as well as polygamy scholars who want details from this journal to bolster their narrative, bolster their theories that Joseph Smith was a practicing polygamist. So this is a
Right.
controversial document, remains suppressed in the church archives to this day. And then
Is
finally,
this,
yeah.
let me, I'm sorry, just a
Oh,
couple questions. Parts of this have leaked, I imagine.
yes,
Okay.
extensively. And there was, in fact, back in I want to say like 96 or 97, George Smith wrote a book that collated together all of the excerpts from the Clayton journal that we have, from the Nauvoo journal that we have, and the church historian. Snow said just last year or the year before that what is published is about 98% of that journal, and the remaining 2% that hasn't been released is just sensitive material of like initiation rites and names who are of people who were caught up in polygamy. So it's sensitive information that they haven't published yet. But
Interesting.
once again, they
Okay.
promised it, and still nothing
Right.
from this guy. Yeah.
Right. Right. It's going to
And
take
then
more pressure.
the final thing that I want to talk about is the John Taylor 1886 revelation. So, this was authored during the theological crisis because of polygamy in 1886. The Utah Territory was under continued extreme pressure from the federal government to abandon polygamy. But Doctrine and Covenants 132, that was Joseph Smith's polygamy revelation, it stated that there was the theological necessity of plural wives, that
Yep.
every wife that a man marries becomes the mother of each subsequent planet. So the more wives, the more planets, the greater your glory, right? That's
Yep.
Mormon theology in a nutshell. So that also articulated the quote unquote sealing covenant, right? So in 1886, John Taylor, he's the second prophet of the Brighamite Church. It was Brigham Young, then John Taylor, and then Lorenzo Snow. So John Taylor is an old man living in hiding from the federal government to evade arrest. He's just being carted from safe house to safe house. He's in a safe house and he gives this 1886 revelation. And it stated that polygamy can never be removed from the earth, for it is an everlasting covenant, because, that's the fucking definition of everlasting, right? So after it was authored, that is when, and John Taylor died, that's when the first manifesto was published. And that was Wilford Woodruff, the next prophet, published the first manifesto that said, we are no longer doing polygamy. We were, but we're totally not anymore. And then there's a whole slew of what are called post-manifesto plural marriages, where there were still the church publicly said we're not doing polygamy anymore, but church leaders continued to seal families together in plural marriages. So it's
Right.
a whole subfield of Mormon studies and polygamy studies is post-manifesto polygamous marriages. Well, one of John Taylor's sons, John W. Taylor, continued to seal new plural marriages, as did many of his friends and fellow apostles after the manifesto, and he cited this revelation as justification for him continuing to practice these things. That God does not remove an everlasting covenant. For how can I remove a covenant that is everlasting?
Right.
So John W. Taylor ends up being excommunicated, as do a number of his friends, and he starts what is known as the Council of Friends, and that forms the foundation for the fundamentalist LDS Church. All the while, in 1932, we know that it was documented that this 1886 revelation was transferred into the church First Presidency vault, and that the church has had this document ever since. And that flies in the face of the numerous denials by Brighamite LDS leaders, general authorities, saying that this revelation is a fraud, this revelation does not exist, we do not have it. And finally, just about 2 months ago, they published this document and said, oops, sorry, we have had this document for almost 100 years in our vault, and all those church leaders who said that this document is a fraud or that it didn't exist, well, sorry,
They were speaking as a man.
speaking
Yeah,
as a man,
not as a
Speaking
prophet.
as a man. Oh my
not as a
God. Were they
prophet.
drinking their milk and eating their meat? These
Yeah.
guys, Henry, what is it? Henry Rollins comes to mind. Oh, you're a liar, a goddamn liar. I mean, Jesus
Yes,
Christ, these guys. At least they had the guts to publish it, but goddamn,
right.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ,
quietly.
Exactly.
guys.
Quietly.
Of
They just
course.
released it on the church history online archive library.
Right.
No fanfare, no articles.
No, of
They
course
only
not.
published their own article about it after the Salt Lake Tribune picked it up and was like, "Holy shit, this is huge. This is a crazy moment." And it was a watershed moment for a lot of historians. Like we known this document has existed for over 100 years,
Yeah,
and now finally they publish it. Finally, after
Wow.
all this time.
yeah. I
So
mean,
Wow.
I mean,
the
yeah.
hiding of polygamy and everything, that's really an entire episode on here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And
you're
and
right.
each of these topics that we covered are all their standalone episodes, but this was just kind of a high level overview. And I think
Yeah.
we should do a standalone Mountain Meadows episode because
for
it
sure.
is grueling, it is difficult to deal with, and it reveals a lot of the most dangerous aspects that come along with blind faith and belief
Yes.
in a theocratic regime and religious autocracy and the failings and the darkest aspects of those things. And that a lot of the people who are running the church today want a world closer to 1850s Utah than they do
Yeah,
2020s
they
America.
do.
Exactly, and that's what I want to talk about. So I'm sure that will be our next episode in this history, because this is, I mean, wow, what an overview. I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to break this stuff down, because there are, I'm looking at here 200 years of history, and a lot it's an action-packed history with, cover-ups, denials, deceit, deception, and lots and lots and lots of violence and abuse. And the Mountain Meadows Massacre is probably one of the most classic examples of the willingness that people have to invest all the way and literally kill even their own in order to
Mm-hmm.
propagate this message or put out these ideas so that people will stick with the faith and keep going. um, and and when your movement is steeped in blood like that, you've got to expose it. You've got to.
Yes.
People need to know this stuff. There was a violent past to the Mormon Church. It's not an angelic, peaceful, pacifistic activity,
No,
and
it's
it
not.
never has been.
Nope.
And it never will
And
be.
and it
Never
never
will
will
be.
be. Exactly. That's not ancient history. This is attitudes and emotional investments and a moral foundation that justifies the violence and the behavior and the abuse, right? And it's not just, oh, those FLDS jerks who don't really understand, and they try to do this distancing thing, and they're getting away with it in the minds of too many people, because it's not something distant and unrelated. And I interviewed a woman just a few weeks ago who grew up in an FLDS compound down in Mexico. And
Yeah.
she got away, she got her kids out, and she managed to make something of her life. But it was a complicated, messy, and absolutely disgusting thing going on, just a full-on criminal operation going on down in Mexico with these Mormon believers. And the church gets to say, oh no, that's not us. Bullshit, it's not you, you know.
Right.
And so I love exposing this stuff, because I think
So do
people
we.
need to see that the lengths to which these folks are willing to go. And that's why when I learn about things like $200 billion in reserves, my head explodes, because you know what kind of violence and what kind of abuse and what kind of propaganda campaigns can you leverage against at a mass population level in today's age with that kind of money? You know, the sky is the limit, you know. And people don't even recognize that these smiley, happy, shiny people, you know, living in Utah, have this kind of going on at this as an underbelly of that whole culture. So so that's where I'm trying to come from with this. And we try to keep it light and have fun with this, but you know, let's remember that these are serious people who are willing to engage in violence and cover-ups and just openly lie for decades and centuries now to keep their secrets and keep this fake public image going, you know. And that's kind of where I kind of end off on this thing. So how fun to talk about all this, though. So thank you, Bryce and Shannon, you know, for making it fun, because this is you know, this can be really dark stuff, but it's also at the same time so utterly ridiculous and ludicrous that we can find lots of opportunities to laugh at the silliness as well. So so this has been a lot of fun. So thank you guys very much for showing up again and helping me understand this stuff. Folks out there, I hope you guys are following along like I have been. This is just endlessly fascinating to me. There is going to be a lot more coming on this as we've previewed here today. So I think, you know, we've probably got our next 5 shows laid out already.
I think so.
So
hopefully.
And I told you guys when we first connected, I said I have so many questions. I have so many things I want to talk to you guys about, and this is exactly where I was going. So so thanks for rolling with me.
You're welcome.
This is a lot of fun. I enjoy doing this every time. So thank you. Thanks for providing a platform for us to share our message. And that's the point, is like, yeah, we're talking about fun history and stuff, but there's modern day implications for everything we're talking about, and heed our cry, right? Like, this is an incredibly powerful organization, and we're going to speak truth to it at every opportunity we get.
Yeah.
Big time. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Folks out there, like, subscribe, share, check out the Glassbox podcast, links below to all of this stuff. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.